I don't want to be the greatest restaurant in the world. That's never been my ambition. I want to be a restaurant that provides context in people's lives, in my life. I want to have meaning. And I want to be sustainable. And sustainable is not just what you buy and what you serve. It's how you evolve as a restaurant and how you can ensure that you're here in 10 more years.
Welcome to The Trades Show. I'm your host, Briana Ottoboni. This season, we're on location with artisans in San Francisco. In the epicenter of AI, speed, and innovation, we're exploring a return to slow, a return to craftsmanship, a return to what makes us human, our ability to make with our hands and our hearts, not just our heads. Thank you for being here. Hello, and welcome back. I'm so excited to introduce you to today's guest. Today, I sat down with Stuart Brioza, who, if you aren't familiar with by name, you are likely familiar with one of his incredible restaurants. Stuart Brioza is a James Beard award-winning chef and the co-owner of State Bird Provisions, The Progress, and the Anchovy Bar. His restaurants, to me, feel synonymous with the San Francisco culinary scene and California cuisine. This was one of my favorite episodes to date. I'm so excited for you to listen. We talk about his path of how he got to where he is now, discovery and innovation, and so much more. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you are in San Francisco, which I think many of you are, please go dine at any of his restaurants. I know that anchovy season, I believe, starts this month, so that's where I'll be headed, and I hope you do. Hello. Thank you so much for having us in your space.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and welcome to the Trades Show.
It's a pleasure to have you here, I should say.
Oh, thanks. Okay, so to start off, I'll kind of acclimate everyone a little bit and would love for you to just describe, how would you describe your craft? How would you describe what you do to someone?
I would describe my craft as simply cooking. I work with my hands, I work with my senses. I get to kind of activate all of these simultaneously, which is amazing, right? Yes. It's like sight and the way food sounds when you're cooking, and obviously taste and smells, and then the hand-eye coordination that we employ, and the muscle memory and the steps of cooking. So everything. It's all about cooking.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts of the artists and trades is that, and I shared this with you on our first call, but really like the sensorial body of knowledge that they all contain. And so bring us into your world a little bit.
Okay.
So you have 3 restaurants. How would you describe your work today? How would you describe each of your restaurants and what distinguishes them, but also what unites them?
Great. We do have 3 restaurants now, which, obviously comes with about 130 employees. So I would say my world today, which is much different than my world 14 years ago when we opened State Bird, is that I spend a lot of my time really developing philosophy, setting sort of the stage, mentoring the chefs who've been with me for years now. Not just mentoring, but kind of coaching, being a sounding board to new dishes and flavors. But I would say a lot of what I do is just really guide, communicate, coach, taste. I try to inspire just by being present. I think that I always feel like what wise words do I have for my staff today? And honestly, I think all the wisdom, it's been said. So it's like, how do I avoid kind of that wash, rinse, and repeat cycle that I was in for many years, right? But as I now evolve into a leadership role, and how do I maintain that concept of we just consistently repeat, but also take the restaurants into the next stage of their lives?
Yeah, and for people who haven't had the privilege of dining at any of your restaurants, can you describe each of them?
Yeah, well, State Bird opened 14 years ago with a pretty simple concept of we're going to just cook with freedom and flexibility. And, it's like, how do you define what that is? But it was several things, right? One of it was like, we just wanted to cook. We didn't want to be compartmentalized into a style of restaurant, right? Are you an Italian restaurant or a Chinese or a pizzeria? So I wanted it to be very creative and whimsical, but also I wanted to kind of crack the code as well with Statebird. Part of that, it seems like yesterday, but also it's so common, kind of the way we dine and eat now, where everything is shared on a table, and that's very California cuisine, I think, in essence. But also, small plates were kind of tricky, and it was almost, they became like a bad word. But everybody loves eating little bites of things, whether it's like hors d'oeuvres or izakaya or sushi counter or dim sum. And so we wanted to kind of crack the code on small plates and not look at like a dish. I feel like at the time, Statebird was like a large scale dish that would just kind of go through a shrink machine, and this is now small plates and tapas, but the price didn't totally equate. And what I did is I took like an entree and I was like, well, you have a meat and you have a starch and you have a veg. I was like, that's 3 dishes, right? Yeah. We're going to do a little meat dish, and it's very simple, like 1 to 2, 3 ingredients on it, and then veg and potato, and we're just going to spatter them around the restaurant. And I feel like we did. We conquered that quest, cracking the code of small plates and making them sensible to the American diner, right? Yes. Which is different than the European diner that grew up with tapas in their backyard, right? When it's a cultural phenomenon, it's really hard to bring that to the U.S. because Americans, we have our own kind of dining culture, right?
Yeah, you kind of had to create a new customer,
kind of a new style of thinking.
Totally.
Which was super cool. And then with the Progress, we sort of took it to the opposite side. So we went small plate, Statebird, very locally sourced ingredients, to Progress, which still maintains that locally sourced ingredients, absolutely, to the extreme.
It still feels very California cuisine to me.
That's the idea. Yeah, I think it's the styles, you can see the common thread between really all 3 restaurants. But this is larger family style, beautiful pottery by Mary Mar from Clay.
Yeah, you can listen to her episode too, but that's how we are connected,
which I
loved.
So beautiful. Like everything about Progress was like, I want it to be handmade. I want every table to be cut from, the same tree. Every chair was fabricated, designed, and then built for the restaurant. We sat in the chair until we got the dimensions just right. Everything about Progress is a tribute to the artisan.
Totally. I love that that's where we are now. So that's such a perfect.
It's really special, right?
Yeah.
Everything that was touched was handmade. The glass fixture, the light fixtures were hand blown and designed here.
So much attention to detail.
Yeah, and it was every studio I wanted to go and see for myself, from obviously Mary Mar, which we had a long history of working together, but Alex from Palanquin, who blew the glass fixtures, we went to his studio, designed and developed a mold together, which was super cool. I mean, obviously he led that conversation of what's possible. To the wood tables, I went up to Evan Shively's place up in Tomales Bay, where he's kind of the sawyer, right? He ages wood for most of the woodworking that happens in the Bay Area, and the cypress was all sourced. It actually came out of the Presidio, right? The cypress, and then I hand selected every piece of wood. So it was so cool to be a part of every aspect of the design, and also to hold back on the history of the space to show off the Progress Theater as it was built in 1911. So this was kind of the pinnacle of what I wanted to create with the Progress.
Wow, I love that. And I think with all artisan work, you can really, even if a diner doesn't know all of those things and doesn't know where every chair or table came from, you still kind of feel that when you're in there. You kind of feel the like cohesion, and that there's just such an attention to detail. I mean, even in this space, everything is an extension of that mission.
I think that detail is what's, I mean, we do this with our food, right?
Yeah.
We run it through the plate test and get it on the plate, and we taste, and we're kind of asking ourselves, like, I call it the good, better, best, right? We run it through this idea of, okay, it's a good idea. How can it be improved? How can it be made better? And then have we achieved the best version of that dish, right? And I think recognizing when you've achieved it, because you got to stop at some point.
Yeah.
You can keep teetering and tinkering, but at some point you want to keep the flow going. And so I run this through, it's my test. And design, I think, is very similar, right? Like as you're building something, we look at it, right? I mean, design to me is like it's this opportunity to solve problems, right? And sometimes you don't know the problems. Yeah. You can create problems too. And I think in restaurant, trying to design a restaurant and thinking about form and function, and then the tactile quality and how the food looks on the table next to the walls that they're surrounded by is such an important part of not just cooking, but of the restaurant experience. Right.
Yeah, and I love that scale. That scale to me feels so human. Part of this season is really understanding the intersection between artisanship and technology, where we're in the AI capital of the world. It feels like, there's this constant process of optimizing or automating everything, but I love the way that you describe the good, better, best, because the best isn't necessarily perfection, but it is a level of, there's still like an inherent level of like human imperfection almost, that is what makes it just good enough and allows you to move on. And that's the creation. It doesn't need to be perfect.
Correct.
It is what it is.
I love that. I love that you totally grasp that idea. Also too, I think as chefs, we need stopping points. We need to kind of like,
totally. Every artist.
This is great. We got to pump the brakes and let's take what we've learned and apply it to whatever the next sort of creative portal is, right? And dishes to me are like these little portals, right? Every time a new dish is created, it's sort of a portal that gets opened. There's some idea on a dish that gets kind of open to this next little universe of creativity, and that's being in that zone of creative process, right?
So I feel like Statebird Provisions is almost, it's like the culinary experience piece that you were bringing. I like the style of cooking and eating. Yeah. But the progress is really like the full experience of every part of it.
I think it embodies, we're in this interesting time in California cuisine, because it's like, how do you define California cuisine? You grew up here, I grew up here, and when I was growing up, it was beets and goat cheese, and it was artichokes and fennel. I feel like fennel embodies California cuisine in some way.
Like a grapefruit salad with fennel or something.
Right, yeah. And there's sort of like, when you think back to the origins of California cuisine, it's this idea that it's very European in nature, right? Southern France, Italian, Spanish, Mediterranean, which kind of matches and aligns with our climate. But as we've grown California cuisine, we've learned so much more about it, and I look at progress as sort of the evolution of California cuisine, and our cooking is the evolution. We're in that state where, if you go to a farmer's market right now, you're seeing all those ingredients we talked about, right? The citrus and the fennel and the artichokes and asparagus and kind of these classically European kind of ingredients. But next to it, you're seeing lemongrass and young ginger and varieties of basil that are very common to a specific type of cooking, or specific Chinese cooking spinaches, and then you're at the next stand and you're seeing masa and like hominy and chilies that are dried and grown to dry, and so you're starting to see this evolution of people are bringing to the market what they grow for their own personal communities. And I think this is a fascinating time for California cuisine. It's a little bit of like, Wild West, because you're like, wow, you can kind of do anything.
Yes.
Or you can kind of really hone in on it and take this abundance and look at culturally what makes up California and the Bay Area specifically, that there's so much diversity. And so now we're like playing like on our menus, really, you see this. You'll see Eurocentric dishes. You'll see Japanese influenced dishes. You'll see Mexican and Latin flavors. And it all sort of works in this interesting way. And it can be very complex, and the goal is not to allow it to get complicated, right? So I think progress adheres to this idea, where it's very complex and it's fluid and it's not complicated, right?
Yeah. And then the Anchovy Bar, I feel like, is that kind of narrowing in on creating restrictions to almost create more creativity and more flow within that.
I love that, yeah. And we've evolved too at that restaurant. It's 5 years. But the goal was very simply is celebrating local anchovies. And anchovies, I have been a huge fan since I can remember, but I never really had worked with local anchovies.
Where do they come from locally?
Like, you're looking at the Golden Gate Bridge, and on a great day, they're schooling between the Golden Gate Bridge and like Alcatraz. That's nice for the fishermen because they don't have to go very far, but they usually kind of where the mouth of the Golden Gate opens and the bay opens, like that's really great fishing grounds for anchovies. So they're in our backyard. And nobody knows this, right? I mean, there's a handful of people who do, right, who pay attention. We celebrate things like crab and salmon.
Yes, but you hear more about it.
Yeah, we also like mourn the loss of crab and salmon as the seasons have changed and evolved due to so many circumstances.
I grew up with abalone, and that's another season we mourn.
We don't see anymore. Yeah, not wild, right? There's some great farm raising that's happening for that, but anchovies, nobody celebrates these little guys, and they're like the best thing that you could possibly eat, and they're the freshest. Well, their nutritive value is unreal. It's a blue fish, right? It's also small, so it's got like zero, I mean, I can't say zero, nothing zero, but it's got like very low or if not any mercury content. They're abundant, super sustainable, right? I can go on statistics of anchovies. It gets pretty nerdy, but I've spent a lot of time making sure I understood the fishery, and it's bait fish. It feeds all the other species that are out there, and I buy from the bait fish guy. So I buy my anchovies live. They come to me 2 hours out of water, and we're processing those fish. So we've got what we call the anchovy protocol, right? Which is a fascinating topic in its own, and we've done a lot of work around promoting this idea of, especially for chefs, getting these fish into your kitchen, because they will scoop them out, caught, they're brought in, and they're held live in the bay. And then when you're ready, fishermen will drive up on their boats, scoop fish out, hold them live, put them on the end of a hook and catch halibut and rockfish and black cod and all those, salmon when salmon are running. And, so it's kind of the bait fish, but why aren't we eating the bait fish? It's a ton of work, that's why.
That to me is so much of the artistry and kind of artisanship that goes into the culinary arts space specifically, but not even just thinking about how you're creating the food on your plate, but where that came from, what was the process of creating it. There's just so much, technique and process and tradition and innovation as well.
I think so. I mean, I think that it's a neat system to ensure really great ingredients. And that little anchovy has taught me so much as a chef about how I want to operate with other ingredients and how we treat other ingredients. So I think that there's a huge lesson to be learned from these small fish. Plus, they're so special. They're so special, and they're so fresh, and they're so unique that we should be celebrating this as a local ingredient on a major scale. It's been my mission, to be honest, that's what the Anchovy Bar was built for, as sort of ground zero for when you're coming to San Francisco as a tourist and a food tourist, right? Because, of course, you're going to eat local food, right? And I want people to know, oh, yeah, anchovy season is going off in the summer.
Yeah, and to think about anchovies the way we do, Swan Oyster Depot and
or tomatoes.
Yes.
How about that, right?
Yeah.
We celebrate so many things in food, and anchovies they're very low
Short
on the
end of
celebrated level. Also, like Spain, Italy, France, they relish in these small fish. They know the importance of these. And I think it's a unique ingredient that we're the only place in the country that lands local anchovies and can have them in your restaurant door 2 hours after they're out of water. That's pretty spectacular.
Yeah, that's so special. I didn't
Yeah.
even know that.
Yeah, because after 8 hours out of water, they change totally. So you have to get in, process, go through it, because they start to break down pretty quickly. They're only 15 grams.
I know, they're tiny little guys. Okay, so I feel like you gave us such a beautiful
Yeah.
picture of kind of where we are now, but
Yeah.
can you bring us back a little bit? So you started working
Sure.
in kitchens when you were 15. What was the process of starting to work in kitchens to actually becoming a chef, and then the turning point of, being a chef at restaurants to actually starting your own?
Yeah, that's a great questions, really. So other than a paper route, which I used to
Yes,
deliver the
I love
Cupertino
that.
Courier and the San Jose Mercury News, BMX bicycle, the papers in my front satchel, and door-to-door collections, I've only worked in restaurants. I actually applied for 2 jobs when I was 15, and those in the Bay Area will know of this ski and snowboard shop called Any Mountain. And Any Mountain was that's the job I really wanted, because grew up skiing in Tahoe, transitioned to snowboarding right around 16 years old. And, I wanted to be a stock boy, I guess, and wax skis. I don't know what I would have been hired for, but I applied for Any Mountain. But I also applied at this little pasta restaurant not far from the spot. And, of course, I got the job as a dishwasher,
Yeah.
right?
That was the path you were meant for.
That was the path. And little did I know at 15 that would, my work was done in terms of finding a career, right? I was pretty instantly taken by the industry. I loved washing dishes, spraying it down, bussing tables. And then what happens in a restaurant, it still happens today. I see it all the time. You start as a dishwasher, you show a little bit of interest, and also by kind of necessity. One of the chefs is like, hey, can you go gather this for me? Then can you chop it? Can you slice it and bring it to me? And so kind of by default, I started to use a knife and cutting vegetables, and then making garlic bread, and then taking the big batch of ground meat, shaping meatballs. And I think it was about maybe 6 or 7 months into it, the cooks at this little pasta restaurant, now we made fresh pastas, sold it by the pound, very basic, Alfredo sauce, marinara, bolognese sauce, but everything was made by hand. And one of the chefs, every day they would make me my meal. I'd get a shift meal, so something off of the menu, and I'd watch them while I had time, while they're cooking. And one day the chef was like, I'm kind of tired of making you food, right? Which, it's like, okay. He's like, but I'm going to teach you how to make your own.
Teach a man to fish.
Yeah. So at 15 years old, I had my teach a man to fish and you'll eat for a lifetime kind of moment. And of course, the first one I learned, and we did this linguine and clams. And it was very canned clams, pureed garlic, dried tarragon, cream, white wine. I remember it like it was yesterday. I love this dish. I just had never eaten anything like linguine and clams, and I loved it. And so I would make it every day, and then at some point I burned out on making it, and I was ready for the next dish. And I think it was like chicken piccata, because I had pounded the chicken and floured and prepared it, but then I learned to and make the caper wine butter sauce that went along with it.
So
Yeah,
good.
which still today, I make it home. And, piccata is just maybe one of those dishes that I'll probably die eating. I love it so much. But I kind of like the Americanized versions of it because that's how I learned them. And so, I got hooked. I got hooked. And from there, kind of simultaneously, not just the cooking, but this is 1989, right? So there's no food TV, there's no Instagram, there's a few magazines that I could have cared less about. And it was really the piracy, the sort of like bohemian culture that were kitchens, right? I mean, these were an alternative class of people who were super well educated, very blue collar, came from all walks of life, right? And at the end of the day, sweated and poured over cooking. And I remember two chefs who worked in this pasta restaurant that had taken jobs up at the nearest kind of like elevated restaurant. And I was living with my father at the time. This is in the East Bay, kind of far East Bay, San Ramon, Danville, that area, and this restaurant, the Black Hawk Grill. And these guys were working two jobs. And they were like 22, 23. I was 16 now at the time. And I really looked up to them. And I love their conversations. You know, they were rock climbers on their days off. They lived out of their cars part-time. They were the dirtbag culture of cooking and living and being out in nature, and were super intelligent. I just love these conversations that we would have, and I learned so much from them. And they had taken on a job, and they were talking about things like pork loin and Cornish game hens, and I was like, what is a pork loin? And I had no idea even at this time, even though I'd been cooking chicken, but like I never really associated meat with muscles, right? Like meat's a muscle, yeah. And I just never thought about it. I just thought about it as like pork or beef or chicken, and I just never really put two and two together. And so I was like getting this lesson of, I don't know, anatomy and cooking and the conversations that ensued. And they encouraged me to go and apply for a job. And these were now chefs that were culinary school graduates who some had worked in New York, and they were chefs. They were chefs as we know it, and had kind of cut their teeth. And, you know, after 3 days trying and being encouraged, I'd show up every morning to this restaurant at 7 a.m. because I was told to, right? My chef friends were like, show up. Elliot King is the executive chef. He shows up at 7 a.m., so be at the door waiting for him. And I was in high school still, right? And so I drive up there before school started and meet with Elliot. And the first time he just sort of shrugged me off and was like, no. The second day, kind of same thing. But by the third day, he saw that my tenacity prevailed and said, all right, come back next Tuesday at 3 p.m. and we'll sit down and have an interview. And that was that. And I ended up getting hired at 16 in this restaurant. And this guy took a chance with me, and it was really awesome. It was really awesome. He helped me buy my first knives, and he gave me my first cookbooks, which were the Jacques Pepin cookbooks, La Technique, La Méthode, and La Practice, right? Which were these step-by-step, very photograph-heavy, step-by-step methodology of how to break down a chicken, how to do. And anyway, I was very fortunate to be in this kitchen, and I think I made every single mistake in the book. I cut myself every which way, but I showed up every single day. I never called out sick. I showed up early, was the first in, the last to leave, and you know, and that really gave me the path. It paved a path.
Oh, I love that. There's so many threads I could pull in there. Even just the mistakes thing, we feel sort of biased against making mistakes. And even in more traditional corporate roles, it's how can you be as perfect as you can. But I feel like especially with hands-on work, where you make mistakes is how you grow. You learn what not to do so that you learn why to do it in a different way. I mean, I have a 1.25-year-old niece, and she's trying to walk and falling down, but she's like just slowly trying to figure it out, and you have to fall to figure it out. So even that part I love.
It's a learning part. It's a part of the learning process. Is you make the mistakes and you learn how to navigate and you build resilience, right?
Yeah.
Because it's really humiliating to make mistakes, and it's really, especially in a very, and at that time, I mean, it wasn't we have a very different culture in restaurant industries now. I mean, we've evolved in so many wonderful ways that there's so many great, supportive, nurturing environments. And honestly, that's kind of what our restaurants are built around, is that it's supportive, it's nurturing. I don't want anyone to fall, so we create safeguards. I want it to be hard. I want it to be challenging. But I don't want anyone to stumble to a point where they just aren't learning in a positive manner. But back then, it wasn't that case. It was a very different world.
Yeah.
And that was part of the subculture and the kind of the beauty of being a cook.
Yeah,
right?
can you talk about that a little bit? I mean, Steve Bird is now, 14 years
yeah.
old? And you've been in restaurants for longer than that. And so what have you seen as far as the evolution of cooking and the restaurant industry, especially in San Francisco, that is so built around Silicon Valley and now is kind of having this AI resurgence? But what has the evolution of cooking looked like within that?
I can't speak a whole lot to the AI, that technology aspect of it, but I will say that with the evolution of shared media and thinking social media specifically, that ideas and creativity are, I guess, pre-2010, I feel like you could see the lineage of a dish, right? And if you were paying attention, and which I was, I mean, I was cooking, I was young in kitchens in the 90s, and the 90s were really spectacular in terms of the evolution of American gastronomy, right? There was a lot of chefs that were really charging out, niching. They were pioneers, right? There was a lot of pioneering happening, and a lot of it was still founded on the classics with respect to the classics, but there was kind of a whole new, newer ingredients, things that where there was a trend to really highlight American ingredients, and clearly there's some beautiful American ingredients that exist. And so that was all coming to the forefront, and you would see a chef that would create a dish, and you could see the sort of, it didn't happen overnight, right? Like the success of that dish. It became, that's why you traveled to that restaurant, was for that dish. And it still happens, I think. I think so. I mean, I still try to adhere to that philosophy and have dishes on my menu that are never going to go anywhere, that you will travel to these restaurants because of these ingredients and these dishes. I think there's something so beautiful in that, right?
Heartbreaking when a restaurant takes those away,
It can be. And it's kind of not up to the chef who creates it. It's kind of the lore of the dish and the way that the guests interact with it, and then that gives rise to that dish. But it's an interesting thing to follow that lineage, and I think it's harder and harder to find the lineage, the starting point of a dish, of a creative idea now, because the moment that creative idea is created, it gets documented, it gets put onto social media, and next thing you know, it's like pew,
Everywhere.
pew, 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 everywhere. I think Japanese food has taken the world by storm, and it's kind of a funny joke, but you can be anywhere in the world and you're like, oh, I'm in Germany and eating German food, but it's like German food with dashi, right? And there's the dashification of the world is real, and it's just because there's so much sharing and there's so much access. So in many ways, I would say that that's like a double-edged sword, right? It's shared creativity that moves like wildfire, right?
Yes.
And whereas it used to move just a little slower and allow a dish to kind of become famous and to become why that was like, why would you go to this restaurant? Is to eat that particular scallop dish or duck dish, as in the case of Progress, or quail dish, as in the case of State Bird.
Yeah, and this speaks so much to what you were sharing with me earlier, is the practice of discovery and innovation. I feel like in this time, those have just been sort of sped up to the nth degree, and that has changed those. Like, can you speak to, I just love the way you talked about that before, and I would love for you to share.
Yeah.
How do you even describe discovery and innovation and what that means to your process as a chef?
I was trying to think of this question this morning, actually, because, I don't want to sound like the old guy, like, you listen to me, because I think that discovery comes in a variety of ways. And I try to always say, like, whenever someone tells me restaurant work is hard, right? I hear that all the time, and to be honest, I think it's a lame kind of synthesized comment, because I'm like, is it hard, or is it just all things relative? I mean, it's my world, and it's not hard. I mean, I have days that are hard, and yeah, I've spent, my 20s and 30s working 6 days a week, 16 hours a day. But was that hard, or was that purely for the craft and the love of cooking? And I would say that there was not a single day in my 20s and 30s and 40s, really, that ever felt like I was working, right?
Yes.
So I think that's the difference of a craftsman, right? That philosophy of, like, you're just so engaged with your craft, and every day is an opportunity to be just a little better than you were the day before, right? And you are discovering. And I think about that with my young cooks. Now, they may have a different sense of discovery. For me, it was reading books, cookbooks.
How are you defining discovery versus innovation?
I think discovery evolves into innovation, right? I think you need to have discovery in your cooking, because without discovery, there's no sense of innovating, I don't think, right? Like, you need to be charmed by discovery. Think of travel. When you're traveling, you're discovering. You're also out of your comfort zone. So you're already on this, you're putting out so much energy just to figure out what you're going to do for the day when you're traveling. And so I think that in travel is our best sense of discovery. I think that what's dulled discovery is that we have everything, we have all the answers at our fingertips. I don't want to have all the answers.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I want to use experience and wisdom, again, experience. I want to use that as my launching point, my building grounds. And I see the difference between cooks when I was growing up, or let's say myself, where my discovery was through travel, through experience. I wanted these experiences. I had to work for those experiences. And reading, right? Like, voraciously. Like, I would read cookbooks from start to finish, and I would decode recipes, and I got to a point where you could read a recipe and say, no, that doesn't seem right, the ratios are totally off, and then take that to practice in the kitchen. Now, what I see is that, and I think we're all criminal of this, is that because we have the answers at our fingertips, we don't have to search too far, so we're not as hungry to learn and to discover, if that makes sense. And I feel that too in my own way, right? Like, oh, I don't need to go there because I can watch it on YouTube. And then when you're there and actually having that experience, you've already been desensitized to that experience, right? Because you've seen it. You've seen it before, and you're going to see it again, and yet here you are having it in real time. And for some reason, you're sort of a little, your interest is perhaps piqued differently, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so trying to find those discovery moments are, like, really fascinating to me.
So if you had a whole week that was just dedicated to discovery, what would you do?
What would it look like? Oh my gosh.
Nothing else to do, just discovery. That was your only assignment.
Oh my God. I don't know if I would know how to.
I think that's so true.
I think
I experience that all the time.
It's so easy to just say, like, I think I would try to spend most of it just being bored, right? Like, growing up, I remember that, sitting in the back of the car on a road trip or something, and you just stared out the window. Now my son is just like, hey, is it time? Can I listen to my book on tape? Or, like, what am I supposed to do now? And it was like, I don't know, maybe just stare out the window.
Yeah. My parents, when I was little, they didn't let us say, I am bored.
Right.
If we said I'm bored, they were like, you're not, like, look around. Like, you're just
You're
experience
you're not trying hard enough.
yeah, but just, like, be in it. There's what's boring about wherever
Yeah.
you are and just being in the moment. But it is true. It's hard to find what does discovery look like and how can you kind of intentionally create space for that.
Yeah, I think that I have a really hard time. I always feel like I have to be doing something to better myself, right? Like I can't just open a book and read a book that's about something that I would never read about, right? Like I can read a cookbook because I'm learning and I'm filling my head with information. You know, when I ride a bicycle to just get out and exercise, I'm bettering myself and maybe I'm listening to something. I find that's a really great place for discovery is on a bicycle in nature, where I have these conversations in my head that are really fluid and I feel like I'm figuring out all of life's answers, and at the end of the ride nothing really changed. And it's kind of a cool, just almost being lost, not being bored, but just staring out the window as a kid. Like there's that moment, but you're doing something, you're creating a healthy environment, but you're also like in your head thinking. I think that that's kind of one of my favorite places to be, is just in my head thinking. And that sense of discovery is really special. That's a time in my day that is really important, right? So like just, and I've thought about this, like I'd love to write another cookbook and like to just sit and go, okay, I'm gonna spend a week on like mapping this out. That's like so torturous to me, that idea of trying to map that out. Like I need collaboration, I need to be in the moment. That's where my best ideas come from.
Yes, like trying to, I do this all the time, but trying to like create a task out of this sort of creative concept that needs to just kind of flow and happen on its own. Yeah,
you get it. You know, yeah.
I'm laughing because I feel like we just, I wonder if this is an influence of technology too, and just the having everything at our fingertips and so much input all the time is that it's easy to make everything into how can this be productive? How can this be bettering me? How can I be sort of curating all of these things around me? And the solution often I feel like is just to remove those and sit like under a tree and just be and just
That's
see
so
what kind
hard
of,
to even
yeah,
do
it's
that,
so
right?
hard.
And yet that's how we grew up. And it's like really hard to think about going back.
Totally.
So I think that there's like this, how do you use this technology as a positive tool, and what's important, right? What do you need? What don't you need? We're in a place where everything is just like minefields, right? I think we live in that world where everything is being sold to you as well. And so I think that restaurants can still inhabit, they can be this place of refuge, even though you're coming in and being sold to, but there's so much more to a restaurant. If that's why you're coming into a restaurant, like you're in it for the wrong reason. Like you come into the restaurant for social engagement, to be in somebody else's space and to taste food like you haven't tasted before. That's all part of it. So I love that about restaurants, and that's perhaps my favorite part of restaurants, you know, is the fact that it requires people, right?
Yes.
It requires human interaction, and it requires a particular social contract, right? That requires everyone's active participation, which I think is really spectacular. It doesn't seem like we have a lot of that around, right?
I'm so fascinated by just how those two emerge at the same time, where I feel like we are having this kind of resurgence of appreciation for craft, things that have taken this such an attention to detail or experience or in-person connection. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it's happening at the same time where everything is as convenient as it could possibly be, or you have like as many inputs as you have ever had. And I think that kind of desire to return to being sitting under a tree or being in a restaurant and just sort of absorbing the noises and tastes, again back to that like very sensorial experience. But I think about that all the time, like how can we then use technology to amplify those very innately human desires rather than replace them, really?
Yeah, I think if it's as a tool, I mean, and a necessary tool, because arguably it seems like it would be very difficult to survive without some of these things that we've taken for granted now that are part of our lives, right? And also our biggest nemesis, right? I think of email as that, right? Like, do I really need to have so much communication with people?
Yeah. Okay, I have one more question, then I want to do kind of a quick round to end us. So we talked about the discovery piece, but I want to hear how you're innovating in your restaurants and how, in a time when I think everything feels so fast and it feels like there is that pressure that you talked about to always be doing, always be bettering, always be innovating. How do you feel like you are continuing to innovate in your restaurants, but also making sure that it's at a sustainable pace where you or your team are not burning out?
Right. This is a question that I'm asking myself constantly. And I think that age of a restaurant is really good, right? We live in this world of what's new and what's hot, and we're always looking for new. I mean, that's innovation, right? Is whatever's new is going to be innovative because it's something different. But I think that as a restaurant gets to become a decade old, your movements are slower. And they're more contextualized, I think. And I think that's a way, number one. Because when you start out, you are running, you are sprinting. And the goal is to run the marathon, right? Recognizing that we want to get to the end. We don't know when the end is, but we want to be able to kind of gracefully do this. And so I think that we're evolving ourselves one dish at a time. And it's so easy to think through that lens. I don't want to be the greatest restaurant in the world. That's never been my ambition. I want to be a restaurant that provides context in people's lives, in my life. I want to have meaning, and I want to be sustainable. And sustainable is not just what you buy and what you serve. It's how you evolve as a restaurant and how you can ensure that you're here in 10 more years.
It's longevity.
It's longevity. And that path is really fascinating. And I think also what happens is that you create an environment that is conducive to others thriving in this environment. I think part of being a really good chef is recognizing that those cooks that you've brought up and mentored, and that they really also engaged and believe in your philosophy. That belief evolves into contributions, and contributions evolve into leadership. And leadership in my world is such an important conversation. And at some point, it becomes this collaborative conversation. And our best food is created through collaborative conversations. And now we run a management team in the kitchen that's 12 chefs and sous chefs. And that's a lot. And there's a lot of potential challenges with creativity when you have that many people contributing. I feel like the greatest collaborations with my chefs are when the road is very clear and there are parameters, but I kind of also feel like that they're not doing their job to their full extent if they're not taking a few side roads. So I encourage that as well, as you've always got to keep your eye on the road, on the path, but I also feel like it's really important for growth to take a few side paths.
Yeah, know where the main road is and where it's going, but take a little deer trail now and again.
Absolutely, because that's where innovation starts to happen. And like maybe I have this idea of a particular dish or a style, but I too can be swooned and charmed. And also I don't want to completely stifle others' creativity within the restaurants. We have a responsibility to the restaurants, right? And that's my job, to really create that philosophy and many years of experience went into that, right? But I want to evolve too. I want to evolve collectively.
I'll finish us off with a quick round here.
Yeah.
So you can just answer these with kind of the first things that come
Okay.
to your mind. So one negative way that technology has impacted the restaurant industry.
Yeah, it's so easy. Social media. I think it's the best and the worst thing that has happened, right?
Yeah.
And I think we're starting to see the worst in it as capitalism has taken over
Yeah.
social media.
Okay, and then one way that you see technology positively influencing the
So
restaurant.
reservation platforms, I think, is so awesome for guests. I mean, nobody uses the phone to call for a reservation anymore.
Yes.
Everything is on these platforms. The amount of information that we can collect on our diners in a positive way. This isn't Big Brother by any means, but we can collect really great information. When they last dined with us, what they enjoyed drinking, are they fast eaters? Do they like it to take it slow? We develop relationships with information, right? And the great part is that it requires our team, our staff, to input this information based on experience. So it's really cool.
Yeah, more like the business kind of admin stuff. And I love the relationship building piece. I haven't heard
Right.
that before. Okay, and then what are you most excited about in the kind of culinary arts space right now, or the restaurant industry space?
I think right now I'm really excited, and perhaps it's in my mind where I want to go, is simplicity. And I think that it's going to be impossible for young chefs to find simplicity in their cooking, because I think with simplicity, it comes with a tremendous amount of experience. And, you know, as young chefs, we want to put lots of ingredients on a plate to make it dazzle. But I think that the future is going to go in a simpler way. And simpler is confidence cooking.
I love that. And then if someone is at the beginning of their culinary path, whether they're, 16 and working in restaurants or they're going to culinary school, what advice do you have for them?
I would say don't follow the money. That'll come. And spend a lot of time developing your craft, right? Work in kitchens that are going to exude a positive work environment, but also every day that you're coming home with a new skill, a new technique. And it's hard to know that from the beginning, but progressive restaurants, positive workspaces will help you develop skills.
Oh, I love that. And then regardless of where people are on their artisan path or whether they're just curious about chefs in the restaurant industry, what is one thing that you would want someone listening or watching to take away from this episode?
Oh, wow. Okay. I think honestly, there's artisan hobbyists, right? And there's the true craftspeople, right? And the craftspeople are the ones that dedicate their lives to a single concept or a single discipline. I think artists have a way of looking way beyond that single discipline, and I think craftspeople really go deep and develop themselves and develop really amazing philosophies that can only be developed through time, and it takes a long time.
Yes. I love that. Yeah, and that doesn't need to be an intimidating thing either.
It's a life quest. There was a point and it came early for me, which was amazing, that I just knew that I'm going to be doing this the rest of my life. Everything else is going to be secondary to cooking. And, for many years, I think it's when you open a restaurant that your relationship to cooking changes, because you are so responsible for so many things. But the beauty of that is that your vision comes to life, your truest form of vision. I think that, there's only going to be 5 or 10% of cooks that will actually get to the place where they open up their own restaurant with a true vision of what they want to do. And that's not a lot, all right? That's 1 out of 10 people may make it to that level. And I think it's pretty true, actually. I think life has a strange way of getting in the way. of your vision when you're 22 years old to where now I'm turning to be 52 years old, right? That path is pretty fascinating.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me in your space and
Oh
for
my
this.
gosh.
This was an
This
amazing
is-
conversation.
I appreciate your really thoughtful questions.
Oh, of course.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I really
Good.
appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, or review the show. You'll find everything we talked about, including links to today's guest, in the show notes. You can follow the show on socials @TradesShow. And if you have any guest suggestions, requests, or any questions, my contact information is in the show notes. Full episodes during the season are live every other Thursday on Spotify, YouTube, and wherever you listen to or watch your podcasts. Thank you for being here. See you next time.